these indirect costs, like keeping the lights on, the machines that you need to do the research, and the research assistants. Trump's just decided to put a cleaver into those indirect costs. That's illegal. That's absolutely illegal. Congress has said exactly how much you have to spend on direct and indirect costs. That's why it's a constitutional crisis right now. The president is not abiding by the way in which Congress has said money has to be spent. And why is that? Because he wants to use that spending to demand loyalty, right? So he's specifically targeting research programs because it goes to thousands of universities in this country. And he wants to compel those universities to only engage in conservative speech. Right. He wants to kill liberal speech, progressive values, student dissent on those campuses. So he decides to cut off research funding. And then let me tell you what he's going to do. He's going to start to turn it back on in the red states. He's going to turn it back on for university presidents that pledge loyalty to Donald Trump. And anywhere where there's campus protests speaking out against Donald Trump, their research funding will be cut off. That's why our founding fathers said Congress has to be in charge of spending, not an executive, because that puts them in a position to be a despot, to be a king. That's why it's a constitutional crisis right now.
And so, look, the right has been really effective at investing in the future, right? And we've seen that with the way that they've even focused on Prager University. We've seen that with the way they focused on their independent media sources 10 years before Democrats did. And so, given the fact that they are focusing on the future and kids and trying to proselytize young people in this country and using congressionally allocated funds as a carrot to dangle. Where do we stand right now then? Is Congress going to be able to step in or is, because Republicans control the House and the Senate, is it basically just carte blanche for Trump to continue barreling ahead and just kind of usurping all this power from Congress?
Well, listen, they control the White House, they control the House, they control the Senate. So there is a limit to what Democrats can do. We can slow things down, but we are the minority party. Like the people voted to give them the reins of power. So when there's an illegal power grab like Trump is engaged in, what are our levers? Well, one is the courts, right? So we don't have an army, right? The minority party Democratic senators, we don't have an army, so we can't go and compel the president to obey the law. We need to rely on the courts, or we need to rely on mobilization. And so there is going to be a moment very soon in which we're going to need not hundreds or thousands of people out on the street, but we're going to need tens of thousands of people out on the street, because historically, when democracies are threatened, it is only mass mobilization, and not just from the left, but mobilization from the left, the center, and the right, who recognize that their democracy is about to vanish. And we've got to be sowing the seeds, sort of laying the foundation for that mass public mobilization. We're going to probably need it pretty soon.
To that point then, we've already seen how the beginnings of that are sprouting up across the country. We've seen in these Republican town halls, even in deep red districts, I'm talking R+10, R+15, R+20, or 25. So these are districts that are 25 points more conservative than the rest of the nation. And these guys are getting run out of their own town halls because they're being asked questions that they can't defend, because of course they can't defend them. They are indefensible. Why are you firing veterans is not a question that you have a correct answer for, because there is no correct answer for that. And so what is the answer now? Because we've just gotten guidance. We've just seen that Republicans got guidance from the NRCC saying, don't hold town halls, as opposed to here's the right thing to tell your constituents, or stand up for what your constituents are demanding of you. They're saying, screw that, just don't do the town halls altogether. And so what can Democrats do to leverage that opening here where, look, there are people in these districts who want answers, rightfully so, and now we know, because the guidance has been set down, the clarion call has been issued, that Republicans aren't going to go and talk to these folks?
Well, the first thing we can do is tell the whole story, right? And there's not one story about the billionaire takeover of government and then another story about the destruction of democracy. They're the same story, right? Nobody wants the billionaires to have their mitts into our Social Security and our data and our Medicare and our Medicaid. That's super unpopular. Like, nobody wants that. So the only way that you can get away with that, the only way that Elon Musk can get away with that, is to try to undermine the rule of law and democracy. Now, you do that just by canceling town halls, but you also do that by weaponizing the Department of Justice to try to, target dissenters, by normalizing political violence. So this story, right, is the same story. The destruction of democracy, which is necessary in order to get away with the thievery that is happening, the billionaires stealing from all of us. But Republicans are going to have a hard time hiding. They might not do town halls, but their constituents will show up to their offices. They're going to still do press conferences and school visits, and constituents will find them there. And then I think Democrats are going to probably have to sub in, right? We're going to have to go to Republican states and Republican districts and hold town halls so that, people all across this country, even if their own representatives are denying them the chance to weigh in, have a member of Congress to talk to. So we can convene a national conversation.
Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And listen, I mean, I've been lucky in that, over the course of the last couple of months, a lot of people have, invested in me with small $5, $10 contributions. I'm going to, find a way to spend that money helping people mobilize all over the country and, most likely target the places where the Republican congressmen are hiding.
Well, isn't it true that right now this is the easy part? I mean, this is the part where all we have as of right now is a budget resolution directing certain committees to be able to slash funding. So we have $880 billion that would be cut from energy and commerce. That's the committee that oversees Medicaid. $230 billion would be cut from the Agriculture Committee. That's the committee that oversees food stamps. So it hasn't happened yet, and Republicans have a layer of protection where they can say, well, I didn't sign my name onto anything that would Medicaid isn't even written in this bill. It merely says that we have to cut $880 billion in funding to energy and commerce, knowing full well that the only mathematical way to cut $880 billion from energy and commerce is to cut Medicaid. Same with $230 billion from ag, that's the only mathematical way to do that is to gut food stamps. And so aren't we going to get to the point where eventually we are going to have to prescribe the specific cuts, and then it's not just theoretical, then it's not just the firings of veterans, the gutting of education funding, the elimination of cancer research for kids. Then you've also got these massive programs that service tens or hundreds of millions of Americans in Medicaid and food stamps and whatever else they put on the chopping block that they actually do have to put their names on. And so things are only going to get worse for Republicans from here.
Well, and what's wonderful is that they're trying to have it both ways right now, right? They're out there saying, we just passed a bill to eliminate taxes on tips and taxes on Social Security benefits. Right, none of that's in the bill, right? None of that's in the bill. But they deny the fact that they are cutting Medicaid. So they want credit for the popular stuff that isn't in the bill, and they want to ignore the fact that they're going to have to do some deeply unpopular stuff. So listen, here's where mobilization comes in. They have a super narrow majority in the House. They have a slightly bigger, but very narrow majority in the Senate. In 2017, the number one thing they said they were going to do was repeal the Affordable Care Act. And they thought they were going to do it. They were sure they were going to do it. And we mobilized. We mobilized all across the country. We made it as impossible as we could, and they couldn't do it. Only by one vote, but they couldn't do it. And so here's our job now. Yeah, they passed that sort of blueprint by one vote. The nasty bill, the bill with the devastating cuts to Medicaid that will literally kick thousands of people off their insurance, they may not be able to pass it if we mobilize. So we still have enormous power in this moment because that final bill, they almost have to get every single Republican to vote for it. And so we only have to pick up 2 or 3 or 4, and that is totally possible.
We have the benefit right now, so to speak, of knowing what their justification to be able to make these cuts are. We know that they're going to come forward and say, everything that we're cutting from the budget right now is going to be waste, fraud, and abuse. And so if we see $880 billion, clearly these are just, thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are not even alive right now who are getting Medicaid benefits. We heard in Trump's presidential address that he was really digging in on this idea that there are tons of people getting Social Security benefits because they're hundreds of years old, 200, 300 years old. And so he's laying the foundation to have some type of a predicate to be able to point to justify the impending cuts. And so what do you say to these again, this excuse that we all know they're going to put forward to try and explain away the fact that they're making these massive cuts to these lifelines for the American people?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I could punch you in the nose and then tell you that I didn't punch you in the nose, but your nose is broken, right?
Yeah.
You feel
It's
it.
giving you a lot of credit. Full broken nose.
You want So maybe I couldn't get away with it, but the theory here is that they're going to punch people in the nose, say they didn't punch you in the nose, and think that people won't feel it. If you cut $880 billion out of Medicaid, rural hospitals close. Literally millions of people, maybe tens of millions of people lose their health insurance. Addiction treatment programs shut their doors. everybody will feel an impact. Why? Because 1/4 of Americans, 1/4, get their health care from Medicaid. It pays for 2/3 of nursing home beds in this country. So they're going to come up with all sorts of excuses about how it's not going to impact people, and then it's going to impact